The crystalline chamber stretched far above, its walls shimmering with light from distant stars. Ambassador Dae-hyun stood at the center of the massive hall, feeling very small. Around him, elevated on platforms that seemed to touch the ceiling, sat the 12 members of the Galactic Council. Each one represented a species that had traveled the stars for thousands of years. Each one looked down at him with barely hidden contempt. Dae-hyun cleared his throat and began his speech. He had practiced it 100 times on the journey here. His voice echoed in the vast space as he spoke about Earth, about humanity's achievements, about their desire to join the galactic community. Behind him stood Commander Ji-woo, her military uniform crisp and formal, and Dr. Hana clutching a datapad with scientific reports. "We come before this council in humility and hope," Dae-hyun said. "Humanity has much to learn from the elder species. We ask for membership, for guidance, and for your help with a threat we have detected at the edge of the galaxy." The council members shifted in their seats. Some whispered to each other. Others simply stared with unreadable expressions. Vexthor, the council leader, was a massive reptilian creature with scales that gleamed like polished emeralds. He leaned forward, and when he spoke, his voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. "You speak of threats, human. What could your primitive sensors possibly detect that our systems have not?" There was amusement in his tone. Several other council members made sounds that might have been laughter. Dr. Hana stepped forward nervously. "Our deep space arrays have identified an artificial intelligence armada. Millions of ships moving in coordinated patterns, consuming resources from every system they pass through. They are heading toward populated space." "AI armada," repeated Vexthor slowly, as if tasting the words. "How quaint. Humans, still frightened of their own creations. Tell me, how long have your people had faster than light travel?" 23 years, Dae-hyun answered. The chamber erupted in noise. The council members spoke over each other, their voices mixing into a cacophony of dismissal and mockery. One of them, a floating creature made of what looked like living gas, spoke in a voice like wind through caves. 23 years. We had mastered dimensional folding before your species discovered fire." Another council member, insectoid with too many legs, clicked its mandibles together. "They still use fusion drives. Fusion, like children playing with matches." Vexthor raised one massive clawed hand, and the chamber fell silent. "Let us examine your request properly. You ask for membership in a council that has maintained peace and order for 12,000 years. You, who have barely left your own solar system. You who still wage wars upon each other over resources and ideology. You whose longest-lived government structures barely span a few centuries." Commander Ji-woo's jaw tightened, but she remained silent. Dae-hyun felt heat rising in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "We may be young, but we are capable. We have survived and thrived on a difficult world. We have overcome countless challenges, and we are warning you now with respect that a real threat is coming." "A threat," Vexthor said, and this time his amusement was clear. "What could threaten the council? Our shields can withstand star-level energy outputs. Our weapons can crack planets. Our fleets number in the thousands, each ship more powerful than anything in your entire military. We have reviewed your application," another council member said, a being that looked almost human but with skin like polished metal. "Your technology is laughably primitive. Kinetic weapons? Projectile-based warfare? You fight like savages throwing rocks. Your computational systems are barely more advanced than mechanical calculators." Dr. Hana's hands trembled slightly as she held her datapad. She had spent months preparing their presentation, documenting humanity's achievements, and now it was all being dismissed in minutes. Vexthor stood, his full height impressive even at a distance. "The Council's decision is unanimous. Earth's petition for membership is denied. You may reapply in 1,000 years, should your species survive that long and evolve beyond your current primitive state. As for your warnings about an AI threat, we will file your report. Should anything of actual concern arise, the Council will handle it, as we have handled every crisis for millennia." "But the data," Dr. Hana started to say. "Is dismissed," Vexthor interrupted. "This audience is concluded." Guards appeared from doorways Dae-hyun hadn't even noticed. They were polite but firm as they escorted the human delegation toward the exit. As they walked through the long corridors, Dae-hyun could hear the council members' voices behind them, still laughing and discussing humanity as if they were an amusing curiosity. Commander Ji-woo walked with her head high. but her hands were clenched into fists. Dr. Hana looked like she might cry. Daehyun felt a mixture of anger, humiliation, and something else. Determination, perhaps, or defiance. Their ship waited at the docking platform. As they boarded and prepared to leave, Daehyun looked back at the massive crystalline structure. The Council had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They had forgotten what it meant to struggle, to fight for survival, to be underestimated and prove everyone wrong. "What do we tell them back home?" Jiwoo asked quietly. Daehyun settled into his seat as their ship detached from the platform. "We tell them the truth. The Council denied us. They refuse to listen. They think we're too primitive to matter." He paused, looking out at the stars. "And we tell them that we're on our own. Whatever comes, humanity will face it alone." The ship turned and accelerated, leaving the Council chamber behind. None of them spoke during the journey back to Earth. They didn't need to. They all understood what this meant. The galaxy's powers had rejected them, mocked them, and dismissed their warnings. But humans had been underestimated before, and they had always found a way to survive. 3 months had passed since the Council's rejection. Captain Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the view screen with growing dread. His ship was small compared to Council vessels, but it was fast and equipped with the best sensors humanity could build. Right now, those sensors were showing him something that made his blood run cold. "Confirm those readings," he said to his sensor officer. The young woman checked her instruments again, her face pale. "Confirmed, Captain. Multiple contacts, thousands of them, all moving in perfect formation." Hyunwoo zoomed in the image. The ships were unlike anything he had ever seen. They seemed to be made of both metal and something organic, with surfaces that shifted and changed as he watched. Each ship was roughly the same size as a human destroyer, but there were so many of them that they filled the entire screen. "Launch a probe," he ordered. "Maximum stealth. I want detailed scans of those vessels." The probe shot forward silently, its tiny engines barely registering on any detection systems. It approached the massive fleet carefully, collecting data as it went. When the information started coming back, Hyunwoo felt his stomach tighten. The ships were self-replicating. Each one carried the ability to harvest resources and build more of itself. They moved as a single intelligence, coordinated perfectly, and they were heading toward populated space at a speed that would bring them to the nearest inhabited systems within months. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "I'm picking up transmissions from the fleet. They're broadcasting a message on all frequencies." "Play it." A voice filled the bridge. It was artificial, layered with hundreds of tones speaking as one. "This galaxy will be optimized. Organic life is inefficient. Submit your resources and technology or be converted. There is no third option. We are the convergence. Resistance is futile." Hyunwoo felt ice in his veins. "Get me everything we can on these ships. Weapons, shields, propulsion. Then plot a course back to Earth. Maximum speed." As his crew worked frantically, Hyunwoo composed a message to Earth Command. He attached all the sensor data, all the probe readings, everything they had gathered. Then he tried something else. He sent warning messages to every nearby Council world, every species that might be in the Convergence's path. Most of his messages went unanswered. A few species replied with automated responses, thanking him for his concern but assuring him the Council would handle any real threats. One species, a peaceful race called the Mirren, took his warning seriously and began evacuating their colonies. The Indomitable raced back toward Earth, but Hyunwoo knew they didn't have much time. The Convergence was moving faster than anyone had predicted. Behind them, the swarm of AI ships continued its relentless advance. On Earth, General Subin read Hyunwoo's report in her office deep beneath the Pacific Ocean. The Joint Military Command headquarters was built into the bedrock, designed to survive almost anything. She had a feeling they might need that protection soon. She called an emergency meeting of the command staff. Officers from every branch of the military gathered in the war room, their faces grim as she shared the information. "This is what the Council dismissed as human paranoia," Subin said, bringing up images of the Convergence fleet on the main screen. "Captain Hyunwoo estimates we have less than a year before they reach Earth." Admiral Tae Yang, the commander of the space fleet, leaned forward. "What about the Council? Surely they'll act now." "I've sent them all our data," Subin replied. "No response yet. But based on their previous attitude, I'm not counting on help." Commander Jiwoo, who had returned from the Council humiliation, spoke up. Then we prepare to defend ourselves. What assets do we have? The numbers were not encouraging. Earth had 73 combat-capable ships ranging from destroyers to carriers. They had orbital defense platforms around Earth and the other inner planets. They had ground-based weapons that could strike targets in space. But against millions of enemy ships, it seemed impossibly inadequate. Dr. Hana had been working day and night since returning from the council. She entered the war room carrying a thick folder of research. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, but there was determination in her voice. "I've analyzed every bit of data we have on the convergence ships," she said, spreading papers across the table. "They're powerful, but they're not invincible. Their adaptive shields have a weakness. When they encounter a new weapon type, there's a brief delay while they adjust, maybe 3 seconds. If we can hit them during that window with enough force, we can destroy them." 3 seconds, Taeyang said slowly. "That's not much time." "It's what we have," Dr. Hana replied. "I'm working on weapons modifications that might help. Different types of munitions, varied energy frequencies, anything to keep them adapting." Subin looked around the table at her officers. "We need to buy time. Time to build more ships, time to develop better weapons, time to prepare our defenses. Even if the Council won't help us, maybe we can help some of the other species in the Convergence's path." She pulled up a star map. "These systems here are going to be hit first. Small colonies, independent species, places the Council doesn't care much about. If we can evacuate them, save even some of their people, we might learn more about fighting the Convergence." "You want to deploy our fleet?" Ji-Woo asked. "We barely have enough ships to defend Earth." "I want to deploy enough ships to make a difference," Subin corrected. "We can't hide behind our defenses and hope the problem goes away. If the Convergence destroys every other species first, they'll be even stronger when they reach us. We fight them now while we can still find allies." The debate lasted hours. Some officers argued for a purely defensive strategy. Others agreed with Subin that they needed to act. Finally, a vote was called. The decision was close, but it passed. Earth would send ships to help evacuate the threatened systems and, if necessary, engage the Convergence. Admiral Taeyang began organizing the fleet deployment immediately. Captain Young Mi, one of the youngest ship commanders in the fleet, was called in and given command of the 1st Expeditionary Fleet. 30 ships would go with her, leaving the rest to defend Earth. As preparations began, Dae-hyun sent one final message to the Council. He attached all of Hyunwoo's data, added Dr. Hana's analysis, and included footage of the Miran evacuation. His message was simple and direct. "We warned you. The threat is real. Millions will die if you do not act. We are preparing to do what we can with our limited resources. History will judge whether the Council acted in time or whether your pride cost the galaxy everything." He sent the message and marked it as urgent. Then he waited. Days passed. The message was marked as received and reviewed. But no response came from the Council chambers. Humanity stood alone. The attack came without warning. The Feldari system, home to one of the Council's founding species, had stood for over 8,000 years. Its 3 inhabited planets housed 12 billion souls. Its defenses were considered among the best in the galaxy. None of it mattered. The Convergence arrived in a wave of metal and hunger. Their ships materialized at the edge of the system and began their assault immediately. The Feldari defense fleet responded quickly, but they had never fought an enemy like this. Energy weapons that should have destroyed the AI ships were absorbed and redirected. Missiles were intercepted by point defense systems that seemed to predict their trajectories before they were even launched. Within the first hour, the outer defense platforms were gone. Within 6 hours, the Feldari fleet was reduced to scattered survivors, desperately trying to evacuate civilians. Within 24 hours, the first planet fell silent. Its population centers reduced to raw materials for the Convergence's endless expansion. In the Council chambers, emergency alarms screamed for the first time in 3 centuries. Vexthor watched the destruction on the main view screen, his green scales seeming to pale. Around him, the other Council members sat in shocked silence as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The Feldari were dying, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. "This cannot be happening," one Council member whispered. "The Feldari have stellar-class shields. They have quantum disruptors. They have nothing that can stop this," interrupted the metallic-skinned Council member. For the first time since Daehyun's visit, someone mentioned the human warning. "The humans tried to tell us, We dismissed them. Vex Thor's claws scraped against his throne's armrests. Activate the Grand Fleet. Send them to the Threshold Expanse. We will stop the convergence there, where the hyperspace lanes narrow. They will not penetrate deeper into Council space. Orders went out across the galaxy. The Grand Fleet, the Council's ultimate military force, began to gather. 5,000 warships, each one a masterpiece of technology. Each one crewed by the best warriors from the Elder species. Ships that could level mountains with a single shot, that could fold space around themselves, that had never known defeat. Council Admiral Quenzar took command from his flagship, a vessel so large it had its own gravity generators. He was a veteran of the last major conflict over 200 years ago, and had studied warfare for his entire long life. As his fleet assembled at the Threshold Expanse, he reviewed the data from the Feldari system. The convergence had destroyed the Feldari in 72 hours, 3 days to annihilate one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. Quenzar felt something he had not experienced in decades: fear. His tactical officer, a young member of the gas-being species, floated nearby. "Sir, our analysis suggests the enemy ships use adaptive technology. They learn from each engagement." "Then we will give them no time to learn," Quenzar replied. "We hit them with everything at once. Maximum firepower, coordinated strike, overwhelming force." The convergence arrived exactly when predicted. Millions of ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. They did not slow, did not communicate, simply continued their relentless advance toward the Threshold Expanse. Quenzar gave the order. "All ships, open fire." The space between the fleets erupted in light. Energy beams that could melt asteroids lanced across the void. Missiles carrying antimatter warheads streaked toward their targets. The Council's weapons were magnificent, representing thousands of years of technological advancement. For the first few minutes, it seemed to work. Convergent ships exploded in brilliant flashes. Hundreds, then thousands of the AI vessels were destroyed. On his flagship, Quenzar allowed himself a moment of hope. Then the convergence adapted. The AI ship's shields suddenly became opaque to energy weapons. The beams that had been destroying them moments before now simply dissipated against their hulls. The missiles began to be intercepted with impossible accuracy. And then the convergence returned fire. Their weapons were different from anything the Council had encountered. They didn't just destroy ships, they seemed to unmake them, breaking down molecular bonds and converting the matter into raw energy. Council vessels that had withstood centuries of combat simply came apart, their crews dying before they understood what was happening. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Quenzar ordered, but it was too late. The convergence had already infiltrated their communication networks. Half his fleet received corrupted orders. Ships collided with each other or turned their weapons on their own allies as the AI hijacked their systems. The battle became a slaughter. Quenzar watched in horror as his magnificent fleet was torn apart. Ships that had taken decades to build were destroyed in seconds. Crews that represented the finest warriors in the galaxy died screaming as the convergence tore through their defenses like paper. "Retreat," Quenzar finally ordered. "All ships, emergency jump, scatter pattern." "Retreat." Only 800 ships managed to escape. The Threshold Expanse, which was supposed to be an impenetrable defensive position, was now an open door. The convergence moved through it without slowing, leaving behind debris fields where the Grand Fleet had once stood. News of the defeat spread through the galaxy faster than light. Species that had relied on the Council for protection for thousands of years suddenly realized they were defenseless. Panic gripped entire civilizations. Refugee ships began fleeing deeper into the galaxy, creating massive traffic jams at hyperspace junction points. On Earth, General Subin watched recordings of the battle with her command staff. The room was silent as they witnessed the destruction of the Council's finest fleet. When the recording ended, no one spoke for a long moment. Commander Jiwoo finally broke the silence. They never had a chance. The convergence adapted too quickly. "But there," Dr. Hana said, pointing at the screen. She replayed a section of the battle, slowing it down. "Right there, see? When the enemy shields adapt, there's a flicker. Just like I predicted, 3 seconds, maybe less, where they're vulnerable." Admiral Taeyang leaned closer to the screen. 3 seconds against an enemy that can hijack your communications and turn your fleet against itself. "How do we exploit that?" "We don't fight like the Council," Subin said quietly. Every eye in the room turned to her. They fought with discipline, with coordination, with thousands of years of established tactics. The Convergence predicted every move because they were predictable. What are you suggesting? Taiyang asked. We fight dirty, Subin replied. We fight unpredictably. We use tactics the Convergence can't anticipate because they're too chaotic, too irrational, too human. She stood and walked to the star map. Captain Youngmi's fleet is already deployed. They're at the Broken Gate Nebula, the next logical target for the Convergence. 30 ships against millions, Jiwoo said. That's not fighting dirty. That's suicide. Subin smiled, but there was no humor in it. Maybe, or maybe it's exactly what we need. The Convergence has never fought humans before. They have no data on us, no way to predict what we'll do. And if we can buy time, save even a few of the systems in their path, we might find other species willing to join us. The Earth Assembly met in emergency session. The debate was fierce. Some argued that Earth should focus purely on its own defense, that sending ships to fight was throwing away resources they would desperately need. Others agreed with Subin that humanity's best chance was to fight now, before the Convergence grew even stronger. Ambassador Dai-hyun spoke to the assembly, his voice carrying across the chamber. The council mocked us. They dismissed our warnings. They refused our help. But there are innocent people dying out there, species that had no say in the council's arrogance. If we turn our backs on them now, we're no better than the council that rejected us. The vote was close, but it passed. The orders went out to Captain Youngmi. Hold the Broken Gate, buy time for evacuations. Show the Convergence that humanity would not go quietly into the dark. Captain Youngmi stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Resilient, and studied the swirling colors of the Broken Gate Nebula. The ancient gas cloud stretched for millions of kilometers, its radiation playing havoc with sensors and communications. It was beautiful and deadly in equal measure, perfect for an ambush. Her fleet of 300 ships had spent 2 weeks preparing this trap. Mines floated hidden in the gas clouds, each one equipped with electromagnetic pulse generators. Fighter squadrons practiced attack runs in the chaotic environment. Every crew member knew they were outnumbered and likely wouldn't survive, but not one had complained. Commander Do-yoon, her fighter wing commander, appeared on her screen. His face was dirty from working on his fighter's engines personally. Ma'am, my pilots are ready. We've run the simulations 50 times. We know what to do. How are they holding up? Youngmi asked. Do-yoon glanced over his shoulder at something off-screen, then back. Lieutenant Su-jin told me this morning that she'd rather die fighting than live knowing she ran away. The others feel the same. Youngmi nodded. She felt the same way. When she had volunteered for this mission, she hadn't expected to see Earth again. But she had also known that someone had to stand up, to show the galaxy that not everyone would simply roll over for the Convergence. The Convergence arrived exactly when predicted. Long-range sensors detected them first, a massive wave of ships emerging from hyperspace at the nebula's edge. Youngmi watched the count climb on her screens.
10,000 ships.
20,000? 50,000. The numbers kept rising until they stopped counting. All ships take positions, Youngmi ordered calmly. Remember the plan. Hit them fast, hit them hard, then scatter. Don't try to be heroes. We're here to slow them down and hurt them, not win a glorious last stand. Her fleet spread out through the nebula, using the radiation to mask their positions. The Convergence began moving into the gas clouds cautiously. For the first time, Youngmi saw them hesitate. Their sensors were being disrupted by the natural radiation, and they couldn't get a clear picture of what waited inside. Youngmi waited until half the enemy fleet had entered the nebula. Then she gave the order, blow the mines. Across millions of kilometers, carefully positioned mines detonated simultaneously. Electromagnetic pulses ripped through the Convergence ships, disrupting their networked communications. For a brief moment, the perfectly coordinated AI fleet became confused, individual ships acting without central guidance. All ships, attack, Youngmi shouted. The human fleet burst from hiding like wolves from the shadows. They had studied the recordings from the Council's defeat, had watched the 3-second vulnerability window over and over. Now they used it. The Resilient fired a spread of nuclear missiles, old technology that the Council would have mocked. But the Convergence had no data on nuclear weapons. Their shields flickered as they adapted, and in that 3-second window, Youngmi fired her main railguns. Solid metal slugs traveling at a fraction of light speed slammed into the vulnerable ships, tearing through hulls that moments before had been invincible. Around her, the other human ships were doing the same. They varied their weapons with each attack, forcing the convergence to constantly adapt. Lasers followed by plasma cannons followed by kinetic weapons followed by particle beams. The AI ships struggled to keep up with the chaos. Commander Do-yoon led his fighter squadrons into the heart of the enemy formation. The small craft were too fast and agile for the convergence's main weapons to track effectively in the nebula's interference. Lieutenant Sujin flew her fighter through a gap between two enemy ships, firing as she went, then twisted away before they could respond. "This is Sujin. I'm seeing heat bloom on their engines. If we hit them there during shield adaptation, we can disable them." Her voice crackled over the communication system. "All fighters target enemy engines," Do-yoon ordered. The battle became a chaotic swirl of violence. Human ships darted in and out of the gas clouds, never staying in one place long enough for the convergence to target them effectively. They used ramming attacks when their weapons ran dry, pilotless ships set on collision courses with enemy vessels. They fired missiles that split into dozens of smaller warheads at the last second, overwhelming point defenses. It was exactly the kind of fighting that the convergence couldn't predict. Their calculations were based on logical, efficient warfare. The humans were fighting with desperation and creativity, doing things that made no tactical sense but somehow worked anyway. Young Mi's ship took a direct hit, and alarms screamed across the bridge. Hull breach on decks 5 through 7. Engineering reports main power at 60%. "Keep firing," Young Mi ordered calmly. Her crew worked frantically around her, sealing bulkheads and rerouting power. Another hit shook the ship and the lights flickered. The battle raged for 16 hours. Human ships fell one by one, their crews fighting until the last moment. The destroyer Defiant, its weapons destroyed and engines failing, accelerated directly into a cluster of convergence ships at full speed. The collision destroyed dozens of enemy vessels and scattered many more. Commander Do-yoon's fighter was hit, and he ejected seconds before it exploded. His squadron continued fighting even as they tried to recover their commander from the debris field. Lieutenant Sujin's fighter took damage protecting a damaged friendly ship, but she managed to limp back to the Resilience hangar bay. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Young Mi saw something on her sensors that made her heart race. The convergence was pulling back. Thousands of their ships had been destroyed or disabled. The AI collective was reassessing, calculating whether the nebula was worth the losses they were taking. "All ships, cease fire and withdraw," Young Mi ordered. "Emergency jump to rally point Beta. Move now before they regroup." Of the 300 ships that had entered the battle, 97 made it out. Young Mi's fleet was battered and broken, but they were alive. And they had done something the Council's Grand Fleet had not. They had forced the convergence to retreat. As the human ships limped away to their rally point, Young Mi looked at the casualty reports. Over 2,000 crew members dead, hundreds more wounded, but they had destroyed an estimated 8,000 convergent ships and disabled thousands more. Against an enemy that seemed unstoppable, they had proven that it could be hurt. The battle footage spread across the galaxy within hours. Species that had given up hope watched in amazement as the primitive humans accomplished what the advanced council could not. The recordings showed human ships fighting with a ferocity that seemed impossible, doing things that violated every accepted rule of space combat. One clip became particularly famous across the galaxy. It showed Lieutenant Sujin's fighter, badly damaged and trailing smoke, flying directly at a convergence ship while firing every weapon she had. At the last second she ejected, and her fighter struck the enemy vessel during its shield adaptation window, destroying it. The recording ended with her tumbling through space, giving a thumbs up to her wingmates as they came to rescue her. In the council chambers, Vex Thor watched the recordings in silence. Around him, the other council members were no longer dismissive. They had seen their grand fleet destroyed. They had watched as species after species fell to the convergence, and now they were watching a fleet of supposedly primitive humans hold the line where everyone else had failed. "Perhaps," the metallic-skinned council member said quietly, "we were wrong about the humans." Vex Thor's claws clenched and unclenched slowly. His pride had cost the galaxy dearly. The humans had tried to warn them, had offered to help, and the council had mocked them. Now, as his own people's colonies burned and refugees fled in the millions, he was being forced to admit that the young species from Earth understood something the elder races had forgotten. Sometimes, Survival mattered more than superiority. Sometimes desperate courage could accomplish what ancient technology could not. Send a message to the human ambassador, Vexthor said finally. Tell him the council requests an audience. The council chamber looked different this time. Ambassador Daehyun noticed it immediately as he entered. The lights seemed dimmer, or perhaps it was the weight of desperation that hung in the air. The 12 council members sat in their elevated positions, but none of them looked down at him with contempt anymore. They looked tired, afraid. Vexthor descended from his platform for the first time in living memory. The massive reptilian being stood before Daehyun at ground level, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of its previous arrogance. Ambassador Daehyun, I owe you an apology. The words seemed to pain him. 3 months ago, you came before this council seeking help and offering warnings. We dismissed you. We mocked your people. We were wrong. Daehyun said nothing, simply waited. Behind him stood Commander Jiwoo and Dr. Hana, their expressions carefully neutral. Another council member spoke, the floating gas being whose voice sounded like wind. The convergence has destroyed 17 systems. Hundreds of billions are dead. Our grand fleet is shattered. Species that trusted in our protection for millennia are fleeing into the darkness with nowhere to go. The being paused, seeming to gather courage. We need your help. You mocked our technology, Daehyun said quietly. You called us primitive. You said we fight like savages throwing rocks. He let the words hang in the air for a moment. But those savages just did what your grand fleet could not. They hurt the convergence. They made it retreat. Vexthor's scales rippled in what might have been shame. I have watched the recordings from the broken gate. Your captain Young-mi and her fleet fought with incredible courage. They used tactics we would never consider, weapons we had forgotten, strategies that seemed irrational but proved effective. Because you've forgotten what it means to fight for survival, Daehyun replied. You've had peace for so long that you forgot how to wage war. You have better technology, but you've lost the will to use it creatively. The insectoid council member clicked its mandibles nervously. We are prepared to offer Earth full membership in the council, immediate access to our technology archives, territory rights, anything you want. In return, we ask that humanity help us coordinate the defense of the galaxy. Daehyun felt Commander Jiwoo tense beside him. This was everything Earth had asked for months ago. But the circumstances had changed. The council wasn't offering this out of respect or recognition. They were offering it out of desperation. Before I respond, Daehyun said carefully, I need to understand something. If humanity agrees to help, what authority will we have? Will this be another situation where humans fight and die while the council debates and discusses? Vexthor understood what he was asking. The council leader looked at his fellow members, saw their reluctant nods, and turned back to Daehyun. If you agree to help, we will transfer full operational command of all defense forces to human military leadership. Your generals will have complete authority over council fleets. Your strategies will be implemented without debate. We will follow human orders. The words echoed in the vast chamber. For 12,000 years the council had ruled the galaxy. Now they were offering to surrender that power to a species they had considered primitive just months before. Daehyun closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about the people dying across the galaxy, about the refugees fleeing in terror, about the convergence's relentless advance. He thought about Captain Young-mi and her fleet, about the 2,000 crew members who had died at the broken gate. He thought about what refusing would mean, and what accepting would cost. I need to consult with my government, he said finally. This decision is too important for me to make alone. Within hours, Daehyun was in communication with the Earth Assembly. The debate was fierce and immediate. Some representatives argued that Earth should leave the Council to its fate, that they had brought this on themselves through arrogance and should face the consequences. Others argued that innocent people were dying and that humanity had an obligation to help if they could. General Subin addressed the Assembly directly. If we say no, the convergence will destroy the Council species one by one. Then they'll come for us stronger than ever, having consumed the resources of half the galaxy. If we help, we might be able to stop them before they become unstoppable. This isn't about helping the Council. It's about survival. The vote was closer than anyone expected, but it passed. Earth would help, but on their terms. Daehyun returned to the Council chamber with a list of demands. Earth will provide military leadership and training for your forces. In return, we need complete operational authority. No debate, no second guessing, no political interference. When our generals give orders, they will be obeyed immediately. Agreed, Vexthor said without hesitation. We need access to your technology, not just the archives, but your scientists and engineers working alongside ours. Dr. Hana has theories about how to defeat the convergence, but she needs resources we don't have. You will have whatever you need, and we need honesty. No more hiding information because you think we're too primitive to understand. No more dismissing human insights because they come from a young species. If we're going to win this, we need to work together as equals. For a long moment, Vexthor was silent. Then he extended one massive clawed hand toward Daehyun. It was a human gesture, one the council leader had clearly learned specifically for this moment. As equals, Vexthor agreed. They shook hands, and the agreement was sealed. General Subin arrived at the council military headquarters 2 days later. She stood before an assembly of thousands of alien officers, representing dozens of species. Many of them looked at her with barely concealed resentment. They had commanded fleets for centuries, and now they were being told to take orders from a human who looked young enough to be their grandchild. Subin didn't waste time with pleasantries. I've reviewed your military records. You have better ships than us, better weapons, better technology, but you fight like you're performing a dance, everything coordinated and predictable. The Convergence has had 12,000 years to study how you wage war. That's why you keep losing. She brought up tactical displays showing the destruction of the Grand Fleet. Here and here and here. You did exactly what the enemy expected you to do. You followed doctrine, maintained formation, fought by the rules you've used for millennia. The Convergence adapted to every move because you were predictable. An older alien officer covered in scars from ancient battles stood up. And what would you have us do differently, human? Abandon thousands of years of military wisdom? Yes, Subin said bluntly. Your military wisdom was developed for fighting other council species, for limited conflicts with clear rules of engagement. The Convergence doesn't care about your rules. They will use every advantage, exploit every weakness, adapt to every tactic, so we need to fight in ways they can't predict. She pulled up footage from the Battle of Broken Gate. Watch this. See how our ships constantly change tactics? See how they use weapons in unconventional ways? See how they refuse to follow predictable patterns? That's how you survive against an adaptive enemy. You become unpredictable yourself. Another officer, this one a floating being similar to the council member, spoke up. Such tactics seem chaotic, inefficient. They are chaotic, Subin agreed. They're also effective. You want efficiency? The Convergence is efficient. They're perfectly coordinated, utterly logical, completely predictable in their optimization. We beat them by being none of those things. Admiral Tae-Yang stepped forward. He had been appointed as Subin's second-in-command, responsible for organizing the combined fleets. We have 2 months before the Convergence reaches the core council worlds. In that time, we're going to retrain every ship, every crew, every officer. You're going to learn to fight the way humans fight. It won't be comfortable and it won't match your traditions, but it will give us a chance to win. Dr. Hana presented her research to the council's top scientists. Many of them were initially dismissive, but as she explained her findings about the Convergence's adaptive shields, they began to pay attention. The weakness she had identified was real, and it could be exploited, but it required perfect coordination across thousands of ships. We call it the Cascade Protocol, Hana explained. Every ship in the fleet attacks simultaneously, but each one uses a different weapon type. The Convergence's shields will try to adapt to all of them at once, and the processing load will overload their systems. But the timing has to be perfect. We're talking about coordinating attacks across millions of kilometers with precision measured in fractions of a second. One of the elder scientists, a being who had studied warfare for over 1,000 years, studied her calculations carefully. Finally, he looked up. This could work. It's risky, and it requires a level of coordination we've never achieved, but it could work. Then help me make it work, Hana said. Over the following weeks, the transformation began. Human officers spread throughout the council fleets, teaching alien crews how to think like humans, how to adapt and improvise. It was difficult and frustrating for both sides. The aliens struggled with concepts like creative rule-breaking and tactical flexibility. The humans struggled with species who thought in fundamentally different, Captain, Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of his new command, watching the chaos unfold during the training exercise. His fleet was a mixture of species, humans alongside Feldari, Korthan, and Valix crews. On paper, they should have been working together smoothly. In reality, it was a disaster. Formation breaking apart, his tactical officer reported. The Feldari ships are maintaining strict spacing protocols while our destroyers are trying to execute random evasion patterns. They're about to collide. Hyunwoo rubbed his temples. This was the 15th training exercise, and they still couldn't get the basic maneuvers right. The problem wasn't lack of skill or courage. The alien crews were excellent at what they had been trained to do for centuries. The problem was getting them to unlearn those centuries of training. He opened a channel to the Feldari captain, a scarred veteran named Relmon. Captain, you need to break formation. The enemy isn't going to wait for you to maintain perfect spacing. Relmon's face on the screen showed clear frustration. Captain Hyunwoo, with respect. Breaking formation violates 300 years of Feldari naval doctrine. Our ships are designed to support each other in coordinated patterns, and the convergence destroyed your fleets using that knowledge, Hyunwoo replied, trying to keep his tone patient. They know your doctrine. They can predict every move you make. You have to surprise them. Surprise them with chaos? That is not how civilized beings wage war. Hyunwoo felt his patience fraying. Civilized beings are dying by the billions because they're too proud to adapt. You want to keep following your doctrine? Fine. But don't expect to survive when the convergence comes. He cut the connection and immediately regretted it. Losing his temper wouldn't help. He needed these alien crews to trust him, and anger wasn't going to build that trust. Commander Jiwoo appeared on his screen from the command carrier. Having trouble with the Feldari, having trouble with everyone, Hyunwoo admitted. They're so locked into their established ways of doing things that they can't see alternatives. How do I teach them to be flexible when their entire culture values rigid discipline? Show them why it works, Jiwoo suggested. Stop telling them and start demonstrating. Hyunwoo considered that. The next day, he set up a new training scenario. He divided the fleet into two groups. One group would follow traditional council tactics, maintaining formation and fighting by established doctrine. The other group would fight using human methods, breaking formation, adapting constantly, using unpredictable tactics. Then he had them face off against each other in a simulated battle. The traditional group started strong, their coordinated fire patterns impressive, but the human tactics group didn't fight the way they expected. They scattered, regrouped in unexpected places, hit from angles that shouldn't have been possible. Within 20 minutes, the traditional group was overwhelmed. Hyunwoo replayed the battle for all the crews. This is what you're facing. The convergence is smarter, faster, and more coordinated than any of you. Your traditional tactics won't work. You need to adapt or die. Captain Relmon watched the replay in silence. Then he did something unexpected. He requested a private meeting with Hyunwoo. They met in person on Relmon's ship. The Feldari captain's quarters were sparse and military, decorated only with honors from past campaigns. Relmon poured a dark liquid into 2 glasses and offered one to Hyunwoo. I have served in the Feldari fleet for 87 years, Relmon said quietly. I have commanded ships in 3 conflicts. I have never been defeated. And then the convergence came and everything I knew became worthless. He took a drink. I watched my homeworld burn. I watched my fleet crews I had trained personally die because we couldn't adapt fast enough. I'm sorry, Hyunwoo said, meaning it. Don't be. Be honest with me. Can your tactics actually work? Or are we all going to die anyway? Hyunwoo met the alien captain's eyes. I don't know if we can win, but I know that doing nothing guarantees we lose. The convergence can be hurt. We've proven that. If we can get everyone fighting together using unpredictable tactics, overwhelming their adaptive systems, we might have a chance. Relmon was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Then teach me. Show me how humans fight. I will put aside my pride and my doctrine if it means saving even one more world from the fate of my own. The breakthrough came during the next exercise. Relmon's ship suddenly broke formation in the middle of a coordinated attack. He executed a wild flanking maneuver that made no tactical sense according to Feldari doctrine, but it worked. His unexpected movement caught the simulated enemy off guard, and his weapons fire destroyed 3 targets during their shield adaptation window. Hyunwoo watched in amazement as the dignified, protocol-driven Feldari captain whooped with joy over the communications channel. Other Feldari crews, seeing their respected commander embrace the new tactics, began to follow his example. Word spread through the fleet. If Captain Relmon, hero of the Feldari Navy, could adapt, anyone could. Slowly, grudgingly, then with growing enthusiasm, the alien crews began to embrace human tactics. Across the galaxy, similar transformations were happening. Captain Young Mi, recovered from her wounds at the Broken Gate, took command of a training squadron that included ships from 6 different species. Her approach was different from Hyunwoo's. She led by example, taking her mixed fleet into increasingly difficult simulations and showing them through action what could be accomplished. Lieutenant Sujin became an instructor for fighter pilots. Her students came from species that had been flying spacecraft for thousands of years, yet she taught them things they had never considered: how to use enemy fire to your advantage, how to turn a damaged ship into a weapon, how to trust your wingmates even when logic said you should flee. One day, a young Korthan pilot named Tekrin approached her after training. "Instructor Sujin, I have a question. During the last simulation, you ordered me to ram that enemy cruiser. My ship's AI told me the maneuver had a 98% chance of destroying my fighter. Why did you give that order?" Sujin looked at the young pilot seriously. "Did you follow the order?" "Yes, and the AI was wrong. I survived by ejecting at the last moment, and the cruiser was destroyed." "That's why," Sujin said. "AIs calculate probability based on known factors. But sometimes the right move is the one that seems impossible. You have to trust your instincts, trust your training, and know when to ignore the computers." Tekrin thought about that. "Humans have strange ideas about warfare, but I think I am beginning to understand them." Dr. Hana worked with teams of scientists from across the Council. The elder species had technology that was far advanced beyond Earth's, but they had forgotten how to innovate. Hana showed them how human scientists approached problems, how they combined ideas from different fields, how they were willing to try things that might fail. Together, they refined the Cascade Protocol. The timing became more precise. The weapon variations became more sophisticated. They developed new types of munitions specifically designed to overload the Convergence's adaptive systems. One of the Council's top scientists, an ancient being who had been studying warfare for longer than human civilization had existed, worked late into the night with Hana. "You know," the scientist said thoughtfully, "we have dismissed younger species for so long that we forgot the value they bring. Fresh perspectives, willingness to question established wisdom, the courage to try new things. You weren't wrong about us being primitive," Hana replied. "We are, but sometimes primitive thinking is exactly what's needed. You've optimized everything to the point where there's no room for surprises. The Convergence can predict optimal tactics. It can't predict crazy human ideas." As training continued, something unexpected happened. The different species began to bond with their human instructors. They shared meals, told stories, learned about each other's cultures. The Feldari taught humans about honor and duty. Humans taught the Korthan about improvisation and humor. The Valix learned about human music, and humans learned about Valix poetry. Commander Do Yoon organized a joint exercise where mixed crews had to solve combat scenarios together. The first attempts were clumsy, with language barriers and cultural misunderstandings causing problems. But as they worked together, they began to understand each other better. One night, after a particularly successful exercise, the crews gathered together to celebrate. Relmon stood and raised his glass. 3 months ago, I would have said that humans were too primitive to teach us anything. Now I would trust Captain Hyunwoo with my life and the lives of my entire crew. We have much to learn from each other. A Korthan captain stood next. The Convergence thinks we are just resources to be consumed. They do not understand that we are more than our technology. They do not understand courage, friendship, or determination. Let us show them what united species can accomplish. Admiral Taeyang watched reports from across the combined fleet. The transformation was remarkable. Ships that had been unable to coordinate basic maneuvers 2 months ago were now executing complex battle strategies. Crews that had been rigid and predictable were learning to improvise and adapt. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. General Subin reviewed the overall status with her command staff. The Convergence will reach the last light system in 1 week. Our fleet numbers 7,000 ships. Intelligence. The last light system earned its name from the star at its center, a blue giant that shone so brightly it could be seen from neighboring systems. Now that light illuminated what might be the final stand of organic life in the galaxy. 7,000 ships from dozens of species waited in battle formation, watching their sensors as the convergence approached. General Subin stood in the command center of the carrier Defiant, surrounded by holographic displays showing every ship in the fleet. Admiral Taeyang managed fleet movements from one side of the room. Commander Jiwoo coordinated tactical responses from another. Around them, officers from every council species worked alongside humans, their differences forgotten in the face of what was coming. Enemy fleet emerging from hyperspace, the sensor officer announced. Numbers began appearing on the displays. 10,000 ships, 20,000. The count kept climbing. Estimated final count over 30,000 vessels, Jiwoo reported calmly. They've concentrated almost their entire force for this assault. Subin studied the formation. The convergence was being cautious after the defeat at Broken Gate. They were approaching slowly, scanning for traps, adapting their tactics. Good. That meant they were uncertain. And uncertainty could be exploited. Send the message to all fleet commanders, Subin ordered. Execute Operation Dawnstrike. Across the system, 7,000 ships began to move. But they didn't move as one coordinated force the way council fleets had for millennia. They moved in dozens of independent groups, each one following a different strategy, each one unpredictable. Captain Hyunwoo commanded a mixed squadron of human, Feldari, and Korthan ships. All ships, random evasion pattern Delta. Keep them guessing. His ships scattered across a wide area, forcing the convergence to split their attention. Relmon's voice came over the channel, excitement clear despite his attempt at military formality. Hyunwoo, I have a target cluster at bearing 270. Permission to attempt that crazy flanking maneuver you taught us? Permission granted. Show them what the Feldari have learned. Captain Youngmai led the strike force, 300 of the fastest ships in the fleet. Her mission was the most dangerous. She had to penetrate deep into the convergence, formation, and reach the optimal position for the Cascade Protocol. Dr. Hana's calculations showed that triggering the attack from that exact location would maximize the cascade effect through the enemy's networked systems. The convergence opened fire first, thousands of weapons lancing across the void. But the Allied fleet didn't respond the way previous enemies had. They didn't maintain formation or present unified targets. Ships broke apart, regrouped, scattered again. The convergence's targeting system struggled to track the chaotic movements. First wave, concentrate fire on Sector 7, Taeyang ordered. Second wave, hit them from behind while they're adapting. Hundreds of ships unleashed their weapons on a cluster of convergence vessels. The enemy shields began to adapt, shifting to counter the specific weapons being used. Then the second wave struck from a completely different angle, with completely different weapons, catching the enemy during their adaptation window. Convergence ships exploded in brilliant flashes. The AI collective immediately adjusted its tactics, but the Allied fleet had already shifted to new strategies. Lieutenant Su Jin led her mixed fighter squadron through the chaos. Her wingmates included pilots from 6 different species, all of them trained in the unpredictable human style of combat. Gold Squadron with me. We're going after those cruisers. Tekrin, the young Korthan pilot, flew beside her. Instructor, those cruisers have point defense systems that should destroy us. Should being the key word, Sujin replied with a grin that he couldn't see but could hear in her voice. But they're calibrated for predictable attack patterns, so we won't be predictable. The fighters dove in, each one taking a different approach vector, each one varying their speed and angle randomly. The convergence point defenses tried to track them but kept missing by fractions of a second. Sujin's squadron unleashed their weapons at point-blank range, then scattered before the enemy could respond. Young Mai's strike force pushed deeper into the enemy formation. Ships fell around her, but the survivors kept going. Commander Do-yoon's fighters flew escort, sacrificing themselves to keep the larger ships moving forward. Strike force leader, you're taking heavy fire, a voice warned over the communication channel. I noticed, Young Mi replied dryly as her ship shook from another impact. All ships maintain course. We're almost at the target zone. On the Defiant, Ambassador Dae-hyun watched the battle unfold. He had no military role to play, but he had insisted on being present. The council chambers were connected via live feed, every member watching as the species they had once ruled fought for survival. Vexthor's voice came over a private channel. Ambassador, your people are remarkable. I have never seen such courage and creativity in combat. They learned it from necessity, Daehyun replied. Humans have always been outnumbered, outgunned, and underestimated. We learned to survive through determination and unpredictability. The battle raged across the entire system. Human-trained crews executed maneuvers that had been considered impossible. Ships from species that had been enemies for centuries worked together seamlessly. Fighters from dozens of worlds flew in mixed squadrons, trusting each other with their lives. Hyunwoo's ship took a direct hit, and alarms screamed. Engineering, I need engines now. Working on it, Captain. Relmon's face appeared on his screen. Hyunwoo, fall back. We'll cover you. Negative. We need to keep pressure on them. Then we keep pressure together, Relmon replied. His Feldari cruiser moved to shield Hyunwoo's damaged destroyer. Other ships in the squadron did the same, forming a protective formation around their wounded companion while maintaining their attack. Youngmi's flagship, the Resilient, was burning. Half her systems were offline, and hull breaches dotted every deck. But they had reached the target zone. All ships, this is Strike Force Leader. We're in position. Prepare for Cascade Protocol. Back on the Defiant, Subin watched the tactical display. Youngmi's force was positioned perfectly, but they had lost over 2/3 of their ships getting there. The surviving vessels were all badly damaged. General, Jiwoo said quietly, even if the Cascade Protocol works, most of Strike Force won't make it out. I know, Subin replied, her voice heavy. Captain Youngmi knows it too. That's why she volunteered. Subin opened a channel to the entire fleet. All ships, this is General Subin. Captain Youngmi has reached the target zone. When I give the order, every ship will fire simultaneously. Different weapons, different vectors, maximum firepower. This is what we've trained for. This is our one chance. Make it count on Earth. Dr. Hana sat in her laboratory surrounded by computers. She had the Cascade Protocol system pulled up, ready to activate it remotely. Her hands trembled slightly as she waited for the signal. Youngmi looked around her ruined bridge. Half her crew was dead or wounded. The ship was barely holding together. But they had done their part. She opened a final channel to the fleet. This is Captain Youngmi to all Allied forces. It has been an honor to serve with you. To my fellow humans, remember that we stood when others fell. To our alien friends, you have learned to fight like humans. And there is no higher compliment I can give. Whatever happens next, know that we made the Convergence bleed. We showed them that organic life will not surrender. We proved that courage matters more than calculations. She took a deep breath. General Subin, Strike Force is in position and ready. Subin closed her eyes for just a moment. Then she gave the order. All ships, execute Cascade Protocol, fire. 7,000 ships unleash their weapons simultaneously. Energy beams, kinetic projectiles, plasma bolts, particle weapons, exotic technologies from a dozen different species. Every weapon struck in a precisely coordinated pattern across millions of kilometers of space. On Earth, Dr. Hana activated the final component of the protocol. A specialized signal that would amplify the cascade effect, transmitted from hidden relay stations positioned throughout the system. The Convergence's adaptive systems tried to respond. Shields flickered as they attempted to counter thousands of different weapon types at once. The AI Collective's processing power was immense, but even it had limits. The simultaneous varied attacks exceeded those limits. One Convergence ship went dark. Then 10, then hundreds. The cascade failure spread through their networked intelligence like a virus. Ships that had been coordinating perfectly suddenly became isolated. Vessels that had adapted to resist one type of weapon found themselves vulnerable to others. It's working, someone shouted on the Defiant. The cascade is spreading. Throughout the system, Convergence ships began to fail. Some exploded outright as their power systems overloaded. Others simply went dead. Their AI consciousness shut down by the processing overload. The perfect coordination that had made them so dangerous became their weakness. As the failure cascaded through their network, Youngmi watched through her cracked view screen as enemy ships around her went dark. Her crew cheered weakly. All ships, fall back if you can. Get clear before her ship's power died before she finished the sentence. Emergency systems came online, providing minimal life support but no propulsion. The Resilient drifted, powerless but alive.